Ancient visitations from the stars. You are standing at the edge of human history, gazing back into the mist-shrouded cradle of civilization. The earliest myths from across the globe speak of beings who descended from the heavens in blazing chariots, with voices like thunder and powers beyond human understanding. These were not ordinary visitors. To your ancient ancestors, they were gods, creatures of immense knowledge and supernatural strength. But what if they were something else entirely? The possibility arises that these gods were, in fact, extraterrestrial beings. Think of how a primitive human would react to advanced technology. A flying machine? A beam of light? A voice transmitted through a strange device? These would appear miraculous, magical. They would redefine reality. And so, faced with phenomena beyond their understanding, early humans did the only thing they could: they mythologized. You journey now into the origins of this idea: ancient visitations from the stars. Cultures as disparate as the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians along the Nile, and the Maya in the jungles of Mesoamerica share uncanny similarities. They all speak of beings who came from the skies, taught mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and then returned to the stars. Why would such specific and vivid narratives emerge across isolated cultures with no known contact? As you explore ancient texts and temple carvings, you begin to see a pattern. The beings are almost always described as radiant, tall, otherworldly. They often arrive during celestial events: eclipses, meteor showers, or planetary alignments. They offer wisdom, demand reverence, and then vanish. Could this be coincidence, or was there truly a shared global experience of contact? Consider how mythology describes these arrivals: flying dragons in China, flaming wheels in the Middle East, winged chariots in India, and shining discs in the Andes. The symbolism may vary, but the core message is the same: something not of this world came down to Earth. And then there is the fear. Often, these beings inspired both worship and terror. Their power was not always benevolent. Flood myths, tales of divine wrath, and stories of punishment abound. Were these warning signs? Interventions? Or simply misunderstandings of extraterrestrial behavior? Now, in the modern age, with space exploration and quantum physics advancing, humanity dares to reinterpret these stories. The line between myth and memory blurs. Maybe those ancient fireside tales were echoes of something real, something that left its mark not only on stone and scripture but on our very DNA. The question you must ask yourself is this: if ancient people encountered beings from beyond the stars, what did they leave behind? Knowledge? Fear? Hope? Or perhaps a reminder that we are not alone and never have been? Sky gods across civilizations. You step into the realm of legend, where stories whisper across deserts, jungles, and mountain peaks, tales of divine beings descending from the heavens in thunder and flame. These are the sky gods, venerated by countless civilizations. But were they truly gods? Or might they have been something far more tangible: visitors from distant stars? In nearly every corner of the world, ancient peoples recorded encounters with beings who arrived from the skies. The Greeks spoke of Zeus hurling thunderbolts from his throne atop Mount Olympus. The Hindus described Shiva manifesting with a third eye and immense power, descending in a blaze of light. The Norse revered Odin and Thor, traveling on celestial chariots. And in the Americas, the Maya worshipped Kukulkan, a feathered serpent who descended from the sky to share knowledge and wisdom. These beings were always powerful, always radiant, always seemingly beyond human comprehension. But the details you notice are striking: flying chariots, fiery wheels, glowing auras, booming voices. The gods didn't simply appear, they landed, often amid noise, light, and smoke. It sounds eerily familiar to what you might expect from a spacecraft's arrival, not the silent descent of a divine spirit. Consider the ancient Hebrew description of the prophet Ezekiel's vision: a wheeled structure spinning in the air, accompanied by fire and thunder. or the Vedic descriptions of Vimanas flying palaces with propulsion systems and weaponry. The Polynesians tell of bright star beings descending in canoes of fire. Even the Aboriginal Australians have dreamtime stories of sky ancestors who came to Earth from the stars. It becomes difficult to ignore the patterns. Why do cultures with no contact tell such similar stories? The simplest answer: shared imagination grows weak when the specific imagery recurs with such precision across millennia and continents. You begin to realize that the reverence, the rituals, the temples all could have been responses to a profound event, contact. The beings that descended were interpreted through the lens of the time. For those ancient minds, anything so advanced had to be divine. But for you, with modern understanding, it could be something else. And yet, these sky gods weren't merely feared or worshipped, they taught. They introduced knowledge, agriculture, astronomy, architecture. They governed from afar, then vanished, often with promises to return. They weren't eternal deities, they were visitors. Their arrival was dramatic, their departure swift. This framework changes everything. What if religion is, at its root, a historical response to interstellar contact? What if humanity's longing for gods was shaped by real beings who once walked among us not as fantasies, but as emissaries? You realize now that the myths were never just about faith, they were about memory. Memory encoded in story, preserved in temple and scripture. The sky gods may have left, but their presence endures in every legend that speaks of the heavens tearing open and beings of light stepping through. Impossible architecture of the ancients. Now imagine yourself standing before structures so massive, so precise, that they seem to defy the capabilities of the ancient world. Megaliths carved from single stones, weighing hundreds of tons, stacked with unerring accuracy. Temples hewn from cliffs, pyramid complexes aligned with celestial bodies, and stone formations forming complex geometrical patterns only visible from the air. You ask yourself, how could ancient humans have possibly built these? You begin with the pyramids of Egypt, specifically the Great Pyramid of Giza. Constructed from over 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing over 50 tons each, the entire structure is aligned almost perfectly to true north. The precision is baffling, even by modern engineering standards. There are no records of how this was achieved, no blueprints, no prototypes. You start to wonder if the builders had help or knowledge far beyond their time. Travel across the world to Peru and you find the walls of Sacsayhuaman, where giant stones are cut so precisely that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. The stones interlock in complex, earthquake-resistant patterns. No mortar is used, and yet they've stood for centuries. How did the Incas, or a civilization before them, move, lift, and shape these megaliths? Then there's Baalbek, Lebanon, where the trilithon stones each weigh over 800 tons. They were transported and precisely placed on a platform over 5,000 years ago. No crane on Earth today could lift them. No simple system of ropes, pulleys, or levers could achieve what we see there. You're forced to ask, what kind of power moved these stones? In France, at the Karnak site, over 3,000 stones are lined up in perfect rows stretching for kilometers, forming geometric designs visible only from above. The layout reveals knowledge of Pythagorean geometry millennia before Pythagoras was even born. Could ancient builders have had access to aerial views or knowledge of mathematics they shouldn't have known? There's more. The Rakha Kailasa temple in India was excavated top-down from a single rock face, an architectural feat so complex it stuns modern engineers. Thousands of tons of rock were removed without a trace. No debris field, no tool marks explain the method. Could this be the work of advanced machinery? Or guidance from those who possessed such technology? All around the world, similar anomalies repeat. Pumapunku in Bolivia, the Moai of Easter Island, the underground city of Derinkuidu in Turkey. Again and again, you encounter structures that challenge everything we think we know about ancient construction. You start to see a pattern, a global one. A pattern that suggests ancient civilizations either shared knowledge across vast distances or were influenced by a common source. Perhaps that source did not come from Earth. And if that's true, then these impossible constructions may not be monuments to gods, but landmarks left by visitors. Portals, beacons, or tools to be used in ways we still don't understand. Architecture not merely for ceremony, but for communication or demonstration. In these ancient stones, you see fingerprints, not of men and slaves, but of minds beyond Earth, engineers of the impossible. And their message, carved in granite and basalt, still echoes through the ages. The Sumerians and the Anunnaki. You find yourself in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, ancient Mesopotamia, home of the Sumerians, one of humanity's first great civilizations. They gave the world writing, laws, mathematics, and astronomy. But as you delve deeper into their myths and records, you uncover something even more extraordinary: the Anunnaki. To the Sumerians, the Anunnaki were not merely gods in the traditional sense. They were beings who came from the heavens to the earth. They ruled from the skies, brought knowledge, and shaped human destiny. And unlike vague deities of later religions, the Anunnaki were detailed, specific, with names, ranks, purposes. Their stories were written not as metaphors, but as records. You read from the clay tablets of the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Anunnaki are described as descending in flying chariots, living in the sky, wielding powerful tools. They are not ethereal spirits, they are flesh and blood beings with extraordinary capabilities. Their leader, Enki, is said to have created mankind by mixing clay with the essence of the gods. Could this essence be DNA? What you find most remarkable is the consistency of their story. The tablets speak of Nibiru, a mysterious planet with an elongated orbit said to be the home of the Anunnaki. According to the Sumerians, these beings came to Earth seeking resources, particularly gold, which they used to repair their planet's atmosphere. To ease their labor, they genetically modified early hominids to create a working class, humans. If this sounds like science fiction, consider this: the Sumerians were the first people to depict the solar system with accurate representations of all the planets, including those invisible to the naked eye. How could they know that Uranus and Neptune existed, or that Pluto was part of the outer solar system? And how could they describe planetary movements with such precision? You begin to suspect that the Sumerians weren't guessing, they were recording what was shown to them, perhaps even taught to them by the Anunnaki themselves. Mainstream historians claim these myths are symbolic, but symbolism does not explain the scientific accuracy or the technological implications. When taken literally, these ancient texts tell a story of contact, of creators descending from the sky, engineering life, and then retreating into the stars. This narrative reshapes everything. It suggests that human origins were not accidental nor strictly evolutionary but guided, that humanity was molded, accelerated, and perhaps even monitored since its beginning. And the Anunnaki? They were not gods, not in the divine sense. They were advanced beings, perhaps astronauts, scientists, or colonizers. Their presence in Sumerian culture is not as distant deities but as rulers and mentors involved in daily life, building cities, teaching crafts, delivering laws. The implications are profound. You, the modern human, may carry in your DNA echoes of these celestial engineers. And if they created us once, where are they now? Watching from afar? Or planning to return? The stories the Sumerians left behind are not fantasy. They are a message, a record etched in clay, waiting for you to listen, not as a believer, but as a seeker of forgotten truths. Genetic tampering by the gods. You now journey into the heart of a provocative question: what if humanity, as we know it, was not the result of purely natural evolution? What if, at some point in our distant past, our species was engineered? The ancient myths speak clearly. Time and again, you read about gods who created humans from clay, dust, or earth, but always infused with something divine. In the Sumerian texts, Enki and Ninhursag are said to have mixed clay with divine blood. In Hindu epics, the gods produce hybrid offspring through unions with mortals. The Book of Enoch tells of sons of heaven descending to earth and taking human wives. You realize these stories are not isolated, they repeat across cultures and centuries. But these aren't just metaphors for spiritual union. What if they are literal descriptions of biological intervention? You consider the concept of genetic manipulation something humanity only recently began to explore. Yet, the ancient stories suggest that someone, long ago, had already mastered it. You examine the idea of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of heavenly beings and human women said to possess incredible strength and knowledge. Some traditions describe them as heroes or tyrants, others as fallen abominations. Their presence in ancient lore, particularly the Book of Genesis, suggests that early humans saw these hybrids as real, influential beings. Even in India, the Mahabharata tells of Karna, a warrior born from a divine being and a mortal princess imbued with celestial strength and marked by a mysterious birth. These children of the gods appear to be more than symbolic. They are different, powerful, possibly the result of deliberate gene splicing. Could it be that ancient visitors, those we called gods, were experimenting, taking early hominids and enhancing them? If so, you might be living proof of that experiment. Your intelligence, creativity, even your yearning for the stars, perhaps these traits were not evolved, but embedded. You begin to see humanity not just as an earthbound species, but as a hybrid creation. The theory of panspermia, life seeded from space, may apply not just to bacteria, but to consciousness, to design. Perhaps humans were meant to emerge, guided by an external will. This perspective turns the old myths into scientific hypotheses. The creation stories are no longer primitive guesses but encrypted accounts of gene editing, selective breeding, and biological engineering. You ponder why this manipulation would occur. Were we created as laborers, as Sumerian texts suggest? Or was it a scientific experiment, a project to observe sentient evolution? Maybe we were even a failed attempt at building a species in the God's own image. But failure may not be the right word. Humanity has flourished. And if our creators are still watching, perhaps they're proud or cautious. You might be a genetic descendant of ancient astronauts carrying both human resilience and alien spark. In modern times, geneticists have discovered anomalies in the human genome, segments that seem oddly artificial or sudden in development. The missing link in evolution remains elusive. Could this be the shadow of ancient interference? The idea sounds outrageous until you realize that we now alter genes. We clone, splice, and create life in labs. If we can do it, why not someone else long ago? So you look in the mirror and ask, who am I really? A child of Earth? Or the legacy of stars and silicon? Mythologies that mirror science fiction. You dive deeper into the stories of gods and heroes, but something begins to feel oddly familiar, not in the way of ancient fables, but like scenes pulled from the pages of a modern science fiction novel. Flying machines, devastating weapons, teleportation, and cities in the sky, these ideas aren't born of 20th century imagination. They were described thousands of years ago in the sacred texts of civilizations long past. You begin in India, reading the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, two epic tales from antiquity. In these Sanskrit epics, celestial beings fly Vimanas, advanced aerial vehicles that soar through the skies and unleash powerful energy weapons. These machines are described in astonishing detail, circular with rotating components, producing great noise, and traveling at speeds beyond comprehension. The weapons they wield? Not arrows or spears, but fireballs that could level entire cities. Some sound eerily like nuclear explosions, a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. You pause, struck by the clarity of the descriptions. This is not poetic language. This is technical language. These ancient authors weren't merely imagining gods with powers, they were recording the use of technologies that shouldn't have existed in their time. Then you explore the Greek pantheon. Zeus with his thunderbolts. Poseidon commanding tidal waves with a mighty trident. Apollo, who visits the northern realms in a flaming chariot every 20 years. These were not just metaphors for weather phenomena, they were depictions of energy-based technology. Tools, perhaps of non-human origin. In Egypt, the god Ra sails the sky in a solar bark, a ship of light that moves across the heavens. Isis, Thoth, Horus, all associated with powerful devices and symbols that may represent more than spiritual authority. Even the Eye of Ra or Eye of Horus might symbolize surveillance or energy projection. You shift your focus to the Norse myths. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, returns to his hand after being thrown like a guided missile or energy weapon. The gods live in Asgard, connected to Earth by a rainbow bridge Bifrost, which today might be described as a wormhole or portal between dimensions. You start to see that these myths aren't simply religious. They're technical, they're functional, and above all, they are consistent. Across oceans, languages, and thousands of years, cultures describe gods arriving in the sky, wielding incredible tools, and departing in bursts of light. The lines between divine and technological begin to blur. Because to a Bronze Age farmer, a being descending in a flying craft with the ability to speak in many tongues or destroy a city with a glance would be indistinguishable from a god. But you, armed with modern knowledge, can see another possibility. That these were astronauts, scientists, explorers. Perhaps they came not to be worshipped, but to guide. Perhaps their appearance spawned the myths that endured through millennia. And now, in the modern era, you finally have the language to understand what your ancestors tried to describe: not magic, but machinery. Not miracles, but mechanisms. And perhaps the greatest miracle is that these stories have survived at all, encrypted in culture, waiting for the day when we could finally recognize them for what they are. Not fantasies, not fiction, but memories faded, fragmented, but unmistakably real. The Nazca lines and cosmic messages. You now stand above the arid plains of southern Peru, gazing down at one of the most enigmatic sights on Earth, the Nazca lines. Etched into the desert floor are hundreds of massive geoglyphs, animals, plants, humanoid figures, and long, perfectly straight lines stretching for miles. From ground level, these figures are unrecognizable. But from the air, they become stunningly clear. And this is where the mystery deepens. The Nazca civilization, which flourished between 500 BCE and 500 CE, had no known flying technology. So how could they design, plan, and execute such massive images that can only be fully appreciated from hundreds of feet in the air? It's as if these drawings were made for someone looking down from the sky. You begin to explore theories. Some mainstream scholars suggest that the lines were used for ritualistic purposes or astronomical alignments. But others propose a more provocative idea that the Nazca lines were messages or landing guides for beings not of this earth. You examine the long, flat runways, miles of straight paths carved into the land, perfectly level and often ending abruptly at cliff faces. They resemble airport landing strips more than ceremonial walkways. Why would a pre-industrial society expend such effort to create them unless they were trying to attract or communicate with aerial observers? You move from shape to shape. The hummingbird, the spider, the monkey. Each massive, each stylized, each flawlessly proportioned despite being hundreds of feet in size. There's no central observation platform, no hills tall enough nearby for design corrections. How did the Nazca people achieve this without seeing their work from above? One geoglyph in particular chills you, a humanoid figure with large eyes and an oversized head, dubbed the astronaut by modern researchers. It stands on a hillside, waving one hand toward the sky. Was it a welcome? A warning? A memory of a being they had seen descend from above? You consider the context of time. Other ancient cultures also built grand earthworks only visible from the air, the giant chalk figures of England, the mound complexes of North America, the intricate geometric layouts of Teotihuacan. Could they all have shared a common goal? To signal the heavens? The Nazca lines aren't random. They're coordinated, intentional, mathematical. The positioning of some align with solstices and planetary cycles, suggesting a blend of ritual and cosmic timing. Perhaps these weren't just images, they were codes, maps, or calendar systems intelligible only to those with an aerial vantage. You begin to see Earth not as a passive stage, but as a beacon, a canvas on which ancient civilizations drew their knowledge, their stories, and their hopes for contact. Were the lines a form of worship? A plea for return? Or something even more advanced, a communication method encoded with frequency, geometry, and symbolism? Some researchers believe that the geoglyphs may resonate with energetic grids of the planet, creating points of electromagnetic significance. Could the Nazca lines have been meant to guide spacecraft using more than just visuals, perhaps through harmonics or magnetism? As you hover above the dusty plain, you realize that these markings were not meant for you. Not originally. They were for those who could fly. The sky gods. The visitors. Whoever or whatever once looked down from above. And even now, those ancient messages remain waiting, silent, across the desert floor. Were they ever received? Worldwide echoes of celestial teachers. You begin to see a new pattern emerging, one that spans across continents and centuries. It is the story of the teacher from the stars. Again and again, civilizations recount how knowledge was not discovered, but delivered. Not slowly learned, but gifted. And the bringers of this knowledge? Beings who descended from the heavens. You travel first to Greece, where the god Apollo is said to visit the northern land of Hyperborea every 20 years in a chariot of fire. He was a bearer of light, music, healing, and prophecy. But more than that, he was a teacher. His visits weren't symbolic, they were described as real, physical returns. The pattern repeats in India, where deities like Shiva and Krishna offer wisdom and guidance, transforming the civilizations that revered them. These gods do not simply rule, they instruct. Then you cross the oceans to the Americas. In Mesoamerican mythology, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan to the Maya, arrives from the sea bringing astronomy, agriculture, writing, and architecture. He is pale-skinned, bearded, and adorned in brilliant attire, a striking departure from the local population. He teaches for years, then departs, promising to return in the future. You begin to suspect this story is not fiction. It's repetition. Among the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa, you discover a rich oral tradition about beings known as the Namo, amphibious creatures who descended from the sky in a vessel that spun and landed with great noise and fire. These Namo brought cosmic knowledge, including astonishing details about Sirius B, a companion star to Sirius A, invisible to the naked eye and unknown to modern science until the 20th century. How could an isolated tribal society possess such knowledge unless it was given to them? And so you see, in every part of the world, isolated cultures speak of divine visitors who arrive, teach, and vanish. Their wisdom ranges from how to plant crops and build cities to complex astronomical calculations and spiritual practices. These weren't myths, they were memories. You consider the implications. If multiple ancient societies received similar lessons from gods, perhaps they were visited by the same group or by related civilizations. The teachers were not omnipresent deities, but intelligent beings with technology and intent. They wanted humanity to rise, to evolve, to remember. You travel to Polynesia, where myths tell of light-bearing beings descending from the sky, forming relationships with humans and teaching them navigation across the vast Pacific. In China, early emperors were believed to be descended from dragons, not mythical beasts, but flying creatures described in ways that mirror modern aircraft. Even among Native American tribes, legends tell of star people who came down to teach, then returned to the sky. The Hopi, the Zuni, and the Lakota all share these beliefs and all speak of a future return, a day when the original teachers will come back. You realize that these stories are not merely folklore. They are encoded truth passed down through generations, altered by time, language, and metaphor, but rooted in a shared experience, contact. And perhaps the reason these visitors have not returned openly is because their mission was never to dominate, but to plant seeds. Seeds of civilization, of thought, of self-discovery. Maybe they are watching, still waiting for you to be ready to receive the next lesson. The greatest teachers are the ones who let their students grow. Artifacts that defy history. You now walk through museum halls and archaeological sites where time has left behind more than just pottery and stone tools. Scattered across the globe are artifacts so strange, so technologically suggestive that they seem out of place, anomalies that challenge the linear story of human progress. These are the objects that whisper of something forgotten or concealed. Your journey begins in Colombia, where small golden figurines known as the Quimbaya artifacts resemble miniature airplanes. These objects, dated over 1,000 years old, display delta wings, vertical tails, and aerodynamic forms, features seen in modern jet design. Could ancient artisans really have been inspired by birds alone? Or were they replicating something they had seen? Next, you examine the Baghdad battery, an artifact composed of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod. Modern experiments show it could produce a mild electric current when filled with an acidic liquid. Some dismiss it as coincidence, but you wonder, why construct such a device unless it had a purpose? Electricity before Benjamin Franklin, before Edison? Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. This ancient device, dated to around 100 BCE, is a mechanical analog computer used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses. With over 30 bronze gears, it's an achievement of technical complexity not seen again until a millennium later. Who taught the Greeks this level of precision? And what of prehistoric cave drawings that resemble modern astronauts, figures with bulbous helmets, visors, and tubes protruding from their suits? In Val Camonica, Italy, and Tassili Niger in Algeria, these images appear not once, but in clusters. They aren't animals. They aren't spirits. They look like space travelers. You move to Turkey, where Göbekli Tepe, intricately carved pillars rise in circles adorned with symbols and animals. Dated to nearly 12,000 years ago, far older than Stonehenge, its construction contradicts everything we thought we knew about early humans. It was built before agriculture, before cities, before tools were supposed to be this refined. How? And why? In Japan, the Doga figurines dating back to the Jomon period also stand out. These figures have disproportionately large eyes, helmet-like heads, and strange attire. Though labeled as fertility symbols, their appearance raises other possibilities. They look like beings wearing suits, pressurized, protective, possibly designed for space. And then there are the Olmec stone heads in Mesoamerica, enormous basalt sculptures with features that do not match the indigenous populations. Each wears a helmet and their facial structures seem foreign. Were they depictions of ancient leaders or something more enigmatic? Each artifact chips away at the official narrative. They speak not of isolated development, but of intervention, of knowledge imparted, lost, and misremembered. Of images so specific, so consistent across regions and cultures that coincidence becomes harder to defend. You begin to see these anomalies not as mistakes in the record, but as pieces of a hidden chapter, one that points toward contact. These aren't objects of worship. They are reminders, tools, models, possibly even fragments of alien technology misunderstood by the people who found or inherited them. Mainstream archaeology resists these questions because they don't fit the timeline. But truth does not obey chronology. It waits, buried in stone, sealed in clay, etched into temple walls until someone dares to see it for what it is. And now you do. These artifacts are not primitive. They are clues. Sacred rituals as alien contact protocols. You find yourself immersed in the ceremonial world of ancient societies. The incense, the chants, the elaborate dances, the offerings of food, blood, and flame rituals that, on the surface, seem religious. But as you look closer, a new idea begins to emerge. What if these rituals weren't simply spiritual acts, but protocols, carefully crafted methods to communicate with beings from another world? Across the globe, ancient civilizations engaged in remarkably similar rites. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztecs performed blood sacrifices at the tops of pyramids, under precise celestial alignments. In India, Vedic fire rituals called yajnas were conducted to summon divine beings from the heavens. In Egypt, elaborate temple rites aligned with the movement of stars, particularly Sirius and Orion. You begin to see a pattern. Precision, repetition, timing. These were not random acts, they were structured, as if following instructions. You wonder, who gave them these instructions? The rituals often include altered states of consciousness induced through drumming, chanting, dancing, fasting, or hallucinogens. In the Amazon, ayahuasca ceremonies are led by shamans who claim to receive visions from serpents of light or beings from the stars. Are these visions mere hallucinations? Or are they the human brain tuning into a frequency not ordinarily accessible? You explore the temples of Angkor Wat, where rituals were performed in resonance with cosmic cycles, and where staircases and corridors symbolically and physically directed energy toward the sky. In Tibet, monks chant mantras in frequencies measured to be acoustically unique frequencies said to open channels to other realms. In Native American traditions, the vision quest is a rite of passage involving isolation, fasting, and contact with sky beings or spirit guides who deliver messages or gifts. Then you come across something even more striking: specific structures that appear to function like antennae. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the step temples of the Maya, all towering constructions pointing toward the sky, built atop sacred energy lines of the earth. Could these sites have been communication hubs? Their shape, materials, and placement possibly designed to harness electromagnetic energy? You revisit the idea that sound was not just symbolic but functional. In ancient Tibet, stories describe monks levitating massive stones using harmonic frequencies. Similar stories emerge from Egypt, where some claim the pyramids were constructed using sound-based technology. Could the chants and instruments used in rituals have actually manipulated physical reality or served as a beacon? Even the language used in ritual sacred syllables like OM, AUM, or HU are found across different civilizations. Were these universal frequencies, passcodes, perhaps designed to activate something or call someone? And always there is the fire. In ancient Celtic traditions, bonfires were lit on mountaintops during Beltane. In Vedic India, fire was considered the mouth of the gods. In biblical accounts, offerings were burned, with smoke rising as a signal to the heavens. This recurring use of fire as a medium between earth and sky suggests an attempt to be seen from above. So you begin to see these rituals differently. Not as superstitions, but technologies of their time, structured behaviors to initiate contact, guided perhaps by those who once came from the stars. If early humans met extraterrestrials, they would naturally try to communicate again. And what better way than ritual, repeatable, sacred, and aligned with the rhythms of the universe? You realize the ancients may have preserved more than just belief systems. They preserved instructions encoded in religion, myth, and ceremony. The question is, have we forgotten how to follow them? The role of giants and hybrids. Now you turn your gaze to the legends of giants, towering beings of immense strength, often described as the offspring of gods and mortals. These stories are not confined to one region. They exist across continents, from the Nephilim of the Hebrew Bible to the Titans of Greek mythology, from the Rakshasas of India to the Anakim of Canaan. And you begin to ask, what if these weren't just myths, but memories of real, hybrid beings, part human, part otherworldly? The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers, heavenly beings who descended to earth and took human women as wives. Their children became giants, mighty, destructive, and ultimately catastrophic. Similar stories appear in Greek mythology, where gods like Zeus father children with mortals, producing demigods like Hercules. In India's Mahabharata, divine unions lead to warriors with superhuman abilities. These beings often bear unusual traits: enormous stature, unnatural strength, and a deep connection to the sky or stars. They are not just stronger than humans, they are different. And in many stories, they are either revered or feared. But always, they are remembered. You examine ancient burial mounds in North America where oversized skeletal remains were allegedly found, skulls with double rows of teeth, femurs nearly twice the length of a modern human's. Though many of these findings are now dismissed or hidden in dusty archives, the accounts persist. Reports from 19th-century newspapers, obscure archaeological journals, and local oral histories tell of giant bones unearthed in areas once sacred to native tribes. Then you explore the megalithic tombs of Europe, dolmens, menhirs, and cromlechs, massive stone structures often referred to in folklore as the homes or graves of giants. Many are shaped in ways that mirror the symbol pi or feature enormous capstones balanced atop vertical supports. How did ancient people move such stones? Were they aided by the very beings they sought to honor or bury? In South America, particularly Peru and Bolivia, you find legends of beings known as the Viracochas, white-skinned, tall, with elongated skulls. Some believe they were the ancestors of the Inca, others say they were sky beings who came from the sea. Their presence is echoed in the elongated skulls found in Paracas, Peru, which exhibit anatomical differences not explained by cradleboarding. Were these the remnants of a hybrid species? And so you begin to see a narrative unfold: beings from the sky mate with humans. The offspring are giants, heroes, or monsters eventually wiped out by floods, wars, or divine retribution. But not before leaving their mark on human memory. Perhaps this was a genetic experiment, a test, a merging of species that went too far. In modern times, we understand genetic manipulation. We create hybrids in laboratories, alter DNA, and imagine cloning extinct species. If we can do it now, was it impossible then? Or is it more likely that someone else far more advanced did it first? You wonder whether the myths of hybrid offspring, demigods, and titans are records of those experiments. A history of what happens when the genetic code of humanity is touched by an alien hand. And what happens when that experiment produces something too powerful to control. Perhaps that's why the giants were buried. Hidden, forgotten, not because they were fictional, but because they were real. The ancient warnings weren't just moral tales. They were cautions. Some unions are not meant to be repeated. Unnatural leaps in civilization. Now you chart the trajectory of human development and you notice something strange. Civilization doesn't evolve in a smooth, gradual curve. It jumps. Out of nowhere, agriculture appears. Cities rise. Writing systems are born. Monumental architecture explodes across the landscape. Around 3000 BCE, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, from Egypt to Mesoamerica, humanity takes a sudden and dramatic leap forward. You begin to wonder, what triggered this surge? Mainstream history attributes these advancements to trial and error, environmental necessity, or isolated genius. But the simultaneity of progress across distant, unconnected regions suggests otherwise. How did pyramids begin appearing across continents at nearly the same time? Why did astronomy, mathematics, and metallurgy evolve so rapidly after hundreds of thousands of years of slow, tool-based subsistence? You return to the Sumerians, who say they were taught agriculture, irrigation, and governance by the Anunnaki. The Egyptians claim divine beings came from the sky and introduced order from chaos. The Mayas say the gods gifted them calendars and cosmology. Over and over, early cultures credit their advancements to visitors from above. You realize these are not coincidences. They are testimonies. Around the same period, megalithic construction becomes widespread. The Great Pyramids rise in Egypt. Stonehenge is assembled in England. Mohenjo-Daro appears in the Indus Valley with advanced city planning and sanitation. And at Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, precisely cut stones suggest machining techniques not matched until the modern era. How did such complex knowledge appear so suddenly and everywhere? You begin to entertain the possibility that ancient astronauts did more than visit. They may have intervened, deliberately accelerating our progress. Like a gardener pruning a tree or a programmer debugging a system, these beings might have steered us from primitivism toward organized society, ensuring the survival of their own experiment. But if we were a project, what was the goal? To create intelligent laborers? Independent civilizations? Spiritual counterparts? Perhaps the visitors weren't gods seeking worship, but engineers building a network of human societies tuned to cosmic patterns, taught to observe the stars and maintain sacred knowledge. Some say these visitors seeded the earth with hints, sacred geometry, resonant structures, encoded calendars. These were not just spiritual tools, they were technologies, enabling our ancestors to engage with Earth's natural energies, with time, with the cosmos. You examine DNA and wonder, was the leap in brain size and cognitive ability also artificial? Why did Homo sapiens outpace every other hominid species with such speed? Why did symbolic thought, art, and abstract mathematics arrive in such a narrow window? These questions lead you to consider a universal truth: intelligence doesn't evolve smoothly, it erupts. Just like in modern times, one invention begets a revolution. But in the ancient world, with no precedent, the question remains, who lit the spark? And more importantly, did they do it again? What if every major leap, agriculture, writing, metallurgy, navigation, even industrialization, was seeded by an external trigger? A gentle push at just the right moment to keep the experiment going. You begin to suspect we've been watched all along. Nudged when necessary. Allowed to grow but never stray too far. And if that's true, then the story of human civilization isn't just ours. It belongs to something older. Something higher. Something watching still. Ancient weapons of mass destruction. As you peel back the layers of myth and history, another startling theme begins to emerge: tales of unimaginable power, of cities turned to ash, of skies split with fire and earth scorched black. These stories, embedded in ancient texts and oral traditions, sound less like fantasy and more like the echoes of advanced weaponry, weapons that mirror the destructive force of our modern nuclear age. You begin with the Mahabharata, India's ancient epic. In its pages, gods and heroes wield weapons so powerful they make thunder seem like whispers. One such weapon, the Brahmastra, is said to release a single explosion brighter than 1,000 suns. It incinerates entire armies, contaminates the land, and causes hair and nails to fall out, eerily similar to radiation sickness. The land where it was used becomes barren. Is this poetry? Or is it a description of atomic warfare thousands of years before Hiroshima? You look to Sodom and Gomorrah, two cities from the biblical narrative said to be destroyed by fire from heaven. The destruction is total. Nothing remains. Lot's wife turns to a pillar of salt, an odd phrase, unless you consider extreme heat vaporizing human flesh. The ground in the region still shows signs of strange chemical composition. Could this have been an early nuclear event? In Scotland, ancient hill forts exhibit signs of vitrification, stone walls melted into glass by temperatures no ordinary fire could produce. Conventional archaeology struggles to explain how Iron Age peoples achieved this. But from a technological standpoint, it suggests exposure to extreme, possibly instantaneous heat. Again, it echoes the destructive capacity of modern high-energy weapons. You then encounter the legend of Archimedes' death ray, a mirror-based weapon supposedly used to set Roman ships ablaze during the siege of Syracuse. Whether myth or not, the concept of focusing solar energy into a destructive beam sounds strangely modern. Was Archimedes tapping into forgotten knowledge? Recreating a device once used long ago? More recently, researchers have pointed to mysterious zones like Mohenjo-Daro, where skeletons were found lying in the streets, unburied, with radiation levels higher than normal background levels. The city shows signs of abrupt abandonment. No signs of siege. No trace of disease. Just silence and shadows. These stories begin to coalesce into a troubling idea: someone, in our distant past, possessed the power to destroy on a mass scale. Not just with fire or flood, but with weapons that leave scars still visible today. Were these ancient weapons wielded by rival alien factions? Or were they gifts to early humans that were misused? Perhaps these were teaching tools offered to an unready species and quickly withdrawn after catastrophe. Or maybe they were used as warnings to show us what power truly looks like. Even the gods, in many traditions, express fear of these weapons. The use of certain devices comes with great consequences. In the Vedic texts, Brahma himself warns against their misuse. In other myths, entire civilizations are punished for their arrogance and defiance, reduced to rubble overnight. You realize now that humanity may have experienced a cycle: contact, instruction, empowerment, and collapse. We may not be building new technologies, we may be rediscovering them. And as modern governments race to perfect energy weapons, gravity control, and artificial intelligence, you wonder, are we on the verge of repeating an ancient mistake? The past warns you, not with silence, but with ruin. These weren't just myths. They were memories of destruction. They are cautionary tales carved into the bones of history, whispering, "You've been here before." Lost technologies and the power of sound. You now listen not just with your ears, but with your entire being to the ancient world's relationship with sound. As you explore deeper into sacred texts, old legends, and archaeological mysteries, you begin to realize that sound was not merely a tool for communication or ceremony. In the distant past, sound may have been technology, a force used to shape, lift, heal, and even destroy. The ancients often described the universe itself as born from sound. In Hindu cosmology, the sacred syllable Om is the sound of creation. In Egypt, the god Thoth is said to have spoken the world into existence. In Christianity, the Gospel of John begins, "In the beginning was the Word." These aren't just metaphysical musings. They hint at an understanding of resonance, the idea that vibration underlies reality itself. You begin with the Great Pyramids of Giza. Their chambers resonate at specific frequencies. The so-called King's Chamber exhibits properties that suggest acoustic engineering far ahead of its time. Sound, when generated within its granite walls, creates standing waves and vibrations that many researchers believe could affect consciousness or even matter itself. Were the pyramids not tombs, but resonance chambers, built to amplify and harness sonic energy? The legend of the Tibetan monks levitating stones using synchronized chanting and horns has circulated for decades. According to accounts by early Western travelers, large boulders were raised into the air through coordinated sound played at precise angles and distances. The idea sounds implausible until you consider that modern physicists have now achieved levitation of small objects using high-frequency sound waves. If we can do it now on a small scale, could the ancients have done it then on a larger one? You examine the megaliths of Baalbek, the obelisks of Egypt, and the polygonal walls of Peru. These enormous stones were moved and placed with such accuracy that modern machinery would struggle to replicate the feat. Some researchers suggest these structures may have been softened or altered using frequency-based technologies, causing the stones to become malleable, vibrating at a frequency where they could be shaped or fused like clay. Then you consider healing through sound. Ancient shamans and temple priests across the world used drums, flutes, singing bowls, and chants in therapeutic rituals. In Greece, Pythagoras taught that music could heal the soul, using specific intervals and harmonies. In Egypt, the Temple of Hathor at Dendra contains inscriptions of musical instruments used in ceremonies linked to regeneration and fertility. Were these merely spiritual practices or early applications of vibrational medicine? There is also evidence of sonic warfare. Stories tell of walls crumbling and people falling dead when exposed to certain tones. In Jericho, the walls famously collapsed after the blowing of trumpets. Was this symbolic or a literal effect of resonance? Today, sonic weapons exist that can cause nausea, disorientation, or unconsciousness. Again, you find echoes of modern science hidden in ancient myth. And what of language itself? Ancient scripts like Sanskrit and Hebrew were said to be sacred languages, capable of invoking real-world effects when spoken correctly. This idea persists in magical traditions and mystical schools worldwide. Could these languages have been codes, verbal algorithms designed to access a technology we no longer understand? You begin to understand that the ancients didn't view sound as entertainment or abstraction. They saw it as a key, a frequency-based tool that connected them to higher realms, manipulated matter, and conveyed divine knowledge. And perhaps, in a time before written records, sound was the primary interface with technology too advanced to leave blueprints behind. Not a relic of lost superstition, but a whisper of forgotten science. Gods, crowns, and celestial thrones, you now stand at the crossroads of power and divinity, where symbols long tied to religion and royalty, crowns, thrones, halos, staffs, may be more than ceremonial. What if they're remnants, cultural fossils from a time when gods ruled not metaphorically, but physically seated on command thrones of celestial visitors? Start with the crown, a circular or horned headpiece. Nearly every civilization links it to divine authority. Egyptian pharaohs wore crowns adorned with serpents and solar discs. In Sumer, kings and gods bore horned, tiered metallic crowns. In Christianity, saints have halos, radiant rings around the head. Could these stem from actual headgear helmets or devices worn by extraterrestrial beings? Imagine a radiant figure descending from the sky, encased in glowing armor, helmeted, the face obscured by a luminous dome. To early humans, such a being would evoke mystery and awe, remembered as divine. Over time, the memory became icon, now the throne seat of power. Carvings and texts describe gods on elaborate, radiant, often mobile thrones. In Ezekiel, a fiery throne chariot descends, with wheels within wheels and gleaming metal, a vehicle more than a chair. In Hindu texts, gods ride Vimanas, flying palaces described with uncanny detail. In Inca tradition, kings descended from the sky already enthroned, bearing symbols of rule. Then the scepter, a staff gripped by gods and rulers. Osiris wields the crook and flail. Zeus holds lightning. Quetzalcoatl a serpent's staff. Mere emblems of rule or devices of power, tools to control energy or transmit thought. Were these symbolic or functional? And what of hybrid imagery, wings of eagles, bodies of lions, serpent eyes? Were these artistic metaphors or efforts to depict beings part biological, part technological? Were the gods bioengineered, their suits and devices later mimicked by human rulers to inherit their image? Seen this way, divine regalia, crown, throne, staff becomes more than adornment. When the gods left, they may have chosen humans genetically aligned or specially trained to continue their legacy. The tools of rule became symbols of inherited right, interfaces to a forgotten order. Even the divine right to rule in medieval Europe or feudal Asia might trace back to this celestial origin. Rulers claimed authority from the heavens, a tradition born not of metaphor, but memory. A memory of sky beings who once ruled Earth literally, not figuratively. Thus, the iconography of kings and gods may not be invention, but imitation. Humanity did not imagine the gods, they remembered them. Thrones, crowns, staffs, these were not fantasies. They were echoes of what was once real. Luminous beings descending from the stars, seated in radiant crafts, watching the earth from above. The gods never asked to be worshipped, but they were. And the legacy of their presence, their gear, their image, their thrones became the template for kingship as we know it. You've traveled through temples and tombs, across deserts and jungles, into myths and manuscripts, following a trail of cosmic breadcrumbs left by those we once called gods. But now, standing at the edge of all you've uncovered, a new understanding begins to settle. These weren't gods at all, not in the religious sense. They were visitors, teachers, engineers, and maybe even watchers. They came not with thunderbolts, but with tools. Not with magic, but with science so advanced it appeared miraculous to our ancestors. Throughout this journey, you've seen how ancient myths may actually be historical accounts, distorted over time but grounded in real events. Civilizations across the world speak of beings who descended from the sky, brought knowledge, guided construction, altered our biology, and then departed, often promising to return. They left behind architecture so precise we struggle to replicate it today. They left artifacts that don't belong to any known timeline. They left symbols and rituals, technological echoes encoded into religion, preserved by culture, and passed down as sacred. And perhaps most importantly, they left traces in us, in our stories, our genes, and our yearning for something more. You've come to understand that human history may not be entirely human, that the sudden leaps in our evolution, our knowledge, our spiritual awareness could all be signs of intervention. We are not merely the children of Earth. We may be the legacy of something much older, much wiser, and far more expansive than we dared to imagine. But this is not just a story of the past. It is a mirror for the present and perhaps a map for the future. If we were visited once, we may be visited again. If we were guided then, we may still be under observation now. And if these ancient beings left a message encoded in stone, sound, and stars, then perhaps our task is to remember, to listen, and to be ready. So the next time you look at a myth, a monument, or even the night sky, ask yourself not what our ancestors believed, but what they saw, what they touched, what they knew. Because perhaps the gods never left. Perhaps they are waiting for us to wake up.